So I am back doing another Heresy Hump Day chat, and so I've got number of items for today. Got the normal Beverage sponsor, as well as a little bit of a table update, just live what I'm kind of working on. I am going to attempt today to do a little bit of work while I do my Heresy Hump Day chat. That isn't always great, but I think I'm doing simple enough stuff today that it should be fine. Then I've got an esoteric topic today of product timeline and when to jump in to a particular spot in the product timeline of a particular game. So product timeline. And then I have another one that is closely related to that, but less esoteric and a bit more specific, and that is new editions of games. Question around, is that okay? Coming right off the Saga 2.0 release, I think it was interesting to maybe talk about that. But actually, I don't want to just talk about Saga. I want to talk about that and relate it to a number of games and just my experiences with that. So, for today, for the sponsored beverage, we have an old friend. Not one. This isn't a new one that I'm featuring today, but this is Highland Park's 12 year. It's one that I believe I've had on an early hump day. If you go through the 30 plus hump days that exist, I think towards the beginning I have featured Highland Park. This is a nice one. It's a 12 year, very reasonable, reasonably priced scotch. Very nice, smooth. It's been a while since I've tasted it because I do cycle through all of these and generally have them for a while. Not bad. No, it is a good one. It is very nice. This one is distilled in Kirkwall. It would probably... It says that Kirkwall's in the Orkney Islands. The coastal scotches have a tendency, as I understand it and have experienced, to have a bit of the more salty kind of flavor to them. And this one, I would say, does have some of that. Yeah. So, Highland Park. Pretty accessible one. Very nice. So, for the table update, I have just put out a video recently just on my Neanderthals, and what I'm going to be doing in addition to the Savage Core terrain is I'm starting to work on the Saga Livestock box. Now, this is one that I had probably reviewed, I'm guessing, sometime either end of the summer. I don't think it was as late as the fall. Maybe it was, my timing's off, maybe it was even earlier than that, but I just haven't gotten around to it. And so I'm really looking forward to getting around to this one and the Civilians box now. Trying to get a lot of unfinished business for Saga before I start the new army, Scots, for Saga 2.0. And so this is a great time to sort of feed my excitement. I always find when I either get into a new game or there's something expanding for a game that tidying up my stuff, like either making more terrain, finishing off packs that I've never finished off. In this case, These are really accessories, like the animal livestock for the world of Saga. They can be used in some of the scenarios too in the Saga 1.0 first edition as well. But yeah, just tidying this up and just kind of expanding my Saga stuff more gets me excited, even more in the mood to play the new edition that's coming. And many people are already playing it. If you live in close proximity to Gripping Beast in the UK, you may have your books and be seeing that people are playing it online. So yeah, I don't usually do this on my Heresy Hump Day on camera, but I am going to... oh, interesting. I thought it would allow me to switch cameras. But I guess not. Sorry, this is a live figuring things out. Usually I thought it allowed me, I guess once I'm recording on this particular software, it doesn't allow me to switch to my table camera that I have. In any case, yeah, what I have are just, like, I have all of the various animals from the set, and what I'm going to be doing during the show is really just cleaning up these discs, and then once I get finished with that, doing a little bit of filing and cleaning up of all the animal models and just putting them on all these discs. A little shout out to Ralph Astley. You may have, if you follow Ralph's channel, you may have seen in one of his videos where he actually has a real sort of cow that's sort of like this European breed that we see in the Saga set. And so he actually sent me a picture quite a ways back of an actual one that he just sort of passed by and took a picture of. And so I still have that. I don't think Ralph will mind if I share it because he shared it on his channel, but I'll share it in a future video when I'm doing the painting of these guys, because I am going to base these guys off of the picture that Ralph sent me. So I'm actually going to paint those up, and I'll show that picture. And Ralph, you can chime in. I don't think you'll have a hard time if I show your picture. Give me a hard time about it, but in any case, you can reassure me maybe that you're okay with that. But I do appreciate that. So, time to pull out all of my tools, my files, mold line remover, my clippers, and get started. Before I forget, there will be a Musty Wargamers video on Thursday this week, normal time, which we tend to do 8 Central or 7 Mountain. Is what we tend to do. And we are going to have a special guest this week. Adam from Tabletop Minions is actually going to be stopping by to say hello. Yeah, but and so please tune in if you're interested. Now, we're talking about product timeline, when to jump in. So this is a bit of an esoteric topic for wargaming, I think. Although some people could view it as kind of practical, I kind of view it as a little bit out there. Because you're looking at, do you ever look at games that have been going on for a bit, and particularly when you're just starting out in them, not when you've been a part of them for a long time, but particularly when you're just starting out in it. Do you ever look at a game as an evolution over time, and that what you're jumping into may be the latest iteration of that game, but sometimes I find it's helpful to ask yourself, me, somebody that gets into games that sometimes have been around a while, I find it helpful to ask, what iteration do I want to get into right away? Like, how do I want to experience this? Do I want to just get all the latest stuff, whether it be rules, whether it be types of models, various things? Do I want to do that just because it kind of makes sense? It's just the latest stuff in the latest iteration of the game. Or when researching it, Do I find out that the meta's changed considerably over time? The game's been going on for a while, and I'm kind of almost wondering whether I'm losing out on experiencing this game the way it was originally set out to be. So it's kind of weird, right? Like you're thinking about getting into a game, but you almost wonder what part of that game's timeline and that product offering am I getting into? By getting into it now, like maybe I'm best situated to play against other players, and if I'm in like a competitive mindset, it may make total sense to be getting into however you're going to line up with the current meta best. And oftentimes that might mean getting recent stuff, obviously the recent rules, things like that. It might make complete sense to do it that way. It also may have to do with availability too, in the sense that whatever you decide to get may or may not be available if you're wanting to get older things. Now, I mentioned the competitive part, but a couple of aspects that I kind of want to avoid in this topic, because I think they're actually related, but they're not related to the main points that I want to cover, or aspects of the discussion, are the old hammer sort of thing, where you're getting into a game because of the nostalgia, perhaps, of the miniatures of when it started and how the miniature line has been around so long that you identify more with an aesthetic. I want to actually focus more on the game itself and not so much the model aesthetic, because I do think that that's a very valid thing, but it's actually kind of separate from what I'm wanting to talk about tonight. And I don't want to talk about new additions of rules as part of this so much, because we're talking about that in the next topic. It's related, but it's not really the main thrust of the argument either. It's, whether or not you want to stay with your edition because of money and or whatever reason. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And so those two things, when it comes to where to jump in on a product timeline, are not my area of focus for this discussion, however related they are. So, one way to look at this is that for those of you that play a lot of different games or have played games over time, you may realize that the games that you are into, that there were certain times when the game was more fun for you than other times. For whatever reason, whether it be the meta, the way the rules are written, things like that. And so, naturally, when thinking about it from that perspective, you might say to yourself, going into a new game, if you've experienced that already, and particularly if you're not planning on being competitive and you don't automatically just need to get the latest stuff, you might say to yourself, well, if I want to experience this game, I'm going to play this, whether it be, with just a couple of friends, whether it could be, even on your own, like a solo game, etc., you might say to yourself, well, how do I want to best experience this? Is there a particular point within the game where the meta made the most sense to me, that it seems the most interesting? Do I want to just start, depending on how old the game is, at day one, with the kinds of factions that were available, just to see how this was truly intended by the game designers to be played right out of the gate, before changes were made? Because changes can be made for lots of different reasons. They can be made because they need to be made. They can be made because they expand the rule set. They can be made because there was something, like I said, need to be made, something wrong. They can be made because they simply have to be, not because the rules are bad, but because they need to market something. Like they need to continue marketing and catch the business end of this with continued expansions, and perhaps the game didn't need this particular expansion. Perhaps a faction was released that was very unbalanced because of it, compared to the initial games. Now, I'm I'm getting ready to start playing Mordheim. For those of you that have played that, I have heard people at times say that there were certain factions that were released later, perhaps even my Beastmen, because my Beastmen weren't one of the main factions, that are more overpowered than some of the original factions, certain aspects to them. Now that's just stuff I've just read on the net. I don't know how true that is. But I think as a concept, it's feasible, like that could happen. And so if that was the case, you might say to yourself, well, I'm kind of playing a game here that's however many years old. Maybe I should start with one of the original factions so I can actually really kind of experience it in a way that was at the launch point of a very successful game. I am going to talk about a couple of games in reference to this that brought this to my mind. So, one game many of you may not have heard of, this one, and it is a game that's in my kind of backlog of games to play. Like, I have some stuff to play this game. I've made some decisions. I don't have everything, but I'm kind of planning on picking this one up at one point and painting the miniatures and doing a little bit of gaming with it. And that is Untitled World of Twilight. 2 shout-outs. There are probably several that I could do, but 2 shout-outs that I would give for that is one, the first person that actually got me aware of the game was Tristan, Sergeant Tristan Athleth. He's doing a little for us. He's put up a video on that. And then Derek Kinsman, who oftentimes will comment on the channel and has some videos that he throws up of his miniatures, is also involved with Untitled World of Twilight and has miniatures and likes the game. And so I've found out about it from both of those individuals. Now, when first looking into, and I'll throw some images of, I probably already have started with my after post editing, throwing up images of it, but as you can see, like, there are a lot of cool looking creatures in Untitled World of Twilight. It is based on sort of like a non-Tolkien fantasy. It's supposed to be, the creator just wanted just sort of a fantasy setting that just was different, and so that he did set out to do that as an objective, which I think is very cool. As much as I like Tolkien, love Tolkien, I'm completely open to new things. Now, when I was first looking at it, I saw all these really fabulous looking miniatures, all of them so cool, and to be honest, I really felt that the line is only evolving. Like, the sculpting and the types of creatures that are coming out as time goes on and the factions being released are just, they only seem to be getting better and better. And so, in many respects, like, I was kind of looking at some of the more recent stuff when thinking about this game and potentially jumping into it. One of the things that's really nice is that the majority of the rules are free. Like, the basic rule book and the basic rules is free, so you can kind of just go on there and download and read stuff and determine whether you want to try it out or not. And so that's kind of what I did. I actually took a look at the rules. There's Fubarni is like the main good guy race, and Devanu is the main bad guy race. But they've expanded beyond that, the Fubarni Empire. And when I was looking at the initial release and just sort of checking out the game as it was first released, I noticed that range combat was at a minimum. There was an example of it, particular kind of gun I think the engineer can use where there's a template and things, but it's not nearly as prevalent as when they released an additional race that has lots of ranged, and they actually introduced rules like much more in-depth rules for ranged combat. And so, for whatever reason, when I approached like thinking about how I was going to acquire this game, I kind of said, like, I'm not planning on playing this game in tournaments. Like, I'm not planning on like going down and facing like 10 different people at my local gaming store to play this. And so I was thinking about it, about what I really want to do. As much as I love the new models, and I see it again, you know, like the one opportunity of starting earlier in a product timeline is you can always move along the timeline. I mean, that's never, usually not an issue. I mean, if anything, it's just harder to go back with availability and things. But I thought to myself, I really like to start out with the original 2 factions. And I'd really like to experience the game when it was first released, when there was less range combat. You had the original 2 factions, just to really experience that. Kind of experience the product timeline as it unfolded, and less just jumping in where it is right now. And because, like I said, I can jump in to where it is right now at any time. In this case. But I see a benefit of kind of trying to experience it in the way the folks that were early adopters experienced it, the way that the creator initially released it. And so that's one thing that was an example to me as to how I evaluated product timeline and kind of investing in a game and thinking about getting into a game. I'd quickly just say, because I've talked about this on the channel before, that with Saga, or excuse me, that'll come later, with X-Wing, so what you do is you take a swig of whiskey and then your mind goes into a different spot. With X-Wing, I wouldn't say I intentionally initially chose to experience the product timeline at the beginning. I did buy the very first basic set, and so in essence got that original set with like the 2 X-Wings and the 2 TIE Fighters and the 1 X-Wing. And so I did get to experience that. But even as I was looking into it, I kind of approached it with the same mindset of, and in the case of X-Wing, I often use it as an example of trying to further my enjoyment and increase the amount of mystery of my involvement with the game by not getting like all the latest stuff and focusing too much on the latest meta because I'm not playing competitively. I can, in my mind, enjoy ships that I buy that in many cases are outdated due to the latest meta. And I can kind of, even to some degree, as long as my opponents are not the opposite of me, it's okay to be like somewhere in the middle, but as long as they're not like the opposite of me in this regard, as long as they're not totally focused on the meta and trying to maximize every current iteration of the rules and utilize every current ship that comes out in card, as long as that's not the case to an extreme, then I can really enjoy the game and pace myself and utilize the full complement of expansions that have come out with Star Wars X-Wing. It's really has had so many waves, and I've never been able to really keep up with it because I've not been dedicated to that. But however, I actually really enjoy the game. And so for X-Wing, it's allowed me in some ways to keep the mystery going, because like when I do buy a ship, it allows me that newness feeling, and even though if it's quite old on the product timeline, it doesn't bother me so much with the way I approach the game. And so that's another example where I think I haven't thought about it in the same way as I have with Oniral and making that dedicated choice, but it kind of worked out that way, in the same way. And then I kind of mentioned Saga. Saga's a different beast in the sense of, in this discussion, I set out just to really play Dark Ages and bought I bought the Saga original rulebook at a time when many expansions were already available within the Dark Ages to be added, and adding rules and stuff and facts were already developed. But Crescent and Cross wasn't available yet. It came out shortly after I started Saga, but was not quite available yet. Now, I was quite content to really just start out Saga using the original rulebook, kind of being aware of some of the facts and just some of the little extra things. Another shout out to Ralph, but Ralph's always been... He was very helpful for me through that process, because he's sent me resources on a couple of occasions when I've done chats like this and mentioned something. You know, he's either sent me a FAQ or a tournament kind of update for scenarios and just things that were just helpful. And at times, the opponents that I played against and I just chose to use those, and did use them. So it's not that I was like, cannot see anything new, but I never invested in Crescent and Cross because I just never got into, at that point, buying the Crusades models. And I was very content just to initially play the game as, kind of as the way it was initially just released. Not worrying so much about what was happening right at that moment, what was coming out right at that second, and things. Now, Saga, as a historical game, I find it really does kind of lend itself to the competitive scene, which I think is kind of a good thing, in that out of all the games that I play, if anybody said, like, hey, do you want to go down to our local gaming club and play do a little historical skirmish tournament, Saga would probably be one of the easiest ones to do it with the games that I play, just because of the length of time of each game. There's just certain aspects to it that I just find it's fairly elegant in some ways, in the way that it rolls and the movement, and just with the battle boards, and it still is it's not on a grid or anything like that. It's not that confined and streamlined, and there's no movement. Well, I guess there is, there were sticks and things at times for movement, but no fixed movement templates in the way that X-Wing has it. But it has the first edition really does have an element of elegance to it for a small historical skirmish game, in my opinion. So I think it suits that. But despite that, I just, I always kind of wanted to just stick with what I had, and it never really became an issue. Now, there were times when folks came down with, it was particularly when we were just still learning it too, Crescent and Cross, and, we used Crescent and Cross if it had something that conflicted with the original rulebook. We used the Crescent and Cross, and in some cases, I think probably banners and priests and things like that, we would have to use the Crescent and Cross, not the original rulebook. And so, that worked out fine. It never was a huge issue. But it's another example where I was happy to start in the original product timeline, and it worked out well for me in that case. Okay, so trying to think if I've covered all the points that I wanted to. I don't really... I think I've covered everything. But what do you guys think about approaching a gaming system from a product timeline perspective? Do you ever feel that when you're getting into something that you're actually in some ways cheating yourself by actually jumping into everything the latest with it? Do you feel like, I want to experience this game in the way it was intended to be originally, or the way the players that I'm playing against now did like 3 years ago, and I kind of don't want to miss out on all of that, and I want to see what that is for myself. You know, I think it's an interesting way to look at it. So yeah, what are your thoughts? All right, last topic of the evening is new editions. When is it okay to release a new edition of a game? You're probably thinking, uh-oh. I mean, like, this is one of those subjects that really can get people mad and heated. And I have to say that, situationally, I've sat on both sides of the fence on this issue of new editions. And I do have to go through some games to talk about the circumstances of each and just why I would think differently, you know, in one, or have in one situation versus the next. I know you're probably going to think this is nuts that I would want to put money aside for this discussion, but I really do want to put money aside, like, in some ways, at least as much as we can. And the reason I say is this, is that there are some circumstances where I would agree a new edition, and maybe all the stuff that has to come with a new edition, the implications for you could mean hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But most war games, that isn't the case. In most war games, when a new edition comes out, you're looking at, in my experience, less than $100, like US, for your game to update it with a rule book, and maybe just some accessories, like maybe some custom dice, or just something that some new measuring sticks, like something like that. You know, maybe it's 2 books, maybe it's your army book and another book, but like the core rules. But in most cases, if you're just looking at primarily rules being updated, and if your miniatures can all be used and you don't have to buy new miniatures, you're usually looking at around $100 investment. Now, money's a relative thing. I've said this on the channel before when money comes up, and who am I to say what is too much money and what's not enough? But in the grand scheme of things, this hobby, by all accounts, is a luxury. And by all means, buy food and shelter and all of that stuff first. And then when it's all said and done after that, if you're looking at getting a number of years' worth out of $100 for your hobby, and you're doing it a lot, most people can argue that, you know, for the luxury item, you know, compared to other things, this isn't really a lot. If you're just talking about that $100, and if you agree with that dollar amount, that's, you know, kind of roughly, give or take, what you're looking at. And so let's talk about this subject first, money aside. Maybe we'll come back to it. But I think, because I do think the money part can just confuse the issue to some degree, some of the points around whether it's acceptable for a new edition to come out. So let's say that you can still use your miniatures, because I do agree that if a game is changed, and really if you can't use like your armies that you've had for it, in some ways it's not even the same game anymore, because really they're asking you just to buy another game. It's not like a new edition of your game. It's basically they're redoing it in a way that you can't play it anymore unless you buy everything again. Let's put that aside, because that, although that could happen in certain circumstances, it's not. I don't think it's the norm in most cases that you just can't use any of your miniatures anymore. And in some ways, it kind of goes against the idea of a miniature manufacturer, in the sense that they still want to be able to sell you miniatures. And in many cases, the miniatures that were available the year before are still available for the new game, because they have those molds and things. They want to sell you new models, that's for sure. That will never stop, and we don't really want them to stop making models, you know. But in most cases, but yeah, like usually you can use your miniatures from the edition before. Now, I think one concept, there are a couple of concepts that come up repeatedly when we talk about new editions. One of them is who owns the game. And you might think it's obvious that the person that entity that owns the game is the one that has the rights, that makes the money on it, and they're the ones that own the game. And yeah, like, that's true. But there's a sense of ownership among the player base too. Like, once you've bought into it and supported it, there's a sense of ownership that comes with being a gamer for that game. And then over time, like, as new editions come out and things change, there's a bit of a dichotomy between the veterans and the new players that are coming in. And that dichotomy can be like miniatures, you know, in the sense of like latest versus older miniatures that veterans still use. It can be the rules changing. It can be the newer players buying newer models that are closer to the meta, you know, that were based on the new release of the edition. And there can also be a sense of entitlement among veterans too, you know, like in the sense of sometimes they really do feel that the company should do what they want them to do. And it can be a lot of different things. It can be anything from a direction that they feel the company should go with miniature lines. It can be a direction that they feel the company should go in supporting the rules. And it can also be whether or not the company has the right, or, you know, really to release a new edition. And, you know, I don't want to actually paint veterans with a bad brush, because in many cases I consider myself a veteran of a game, and where a saying that I've said, and I've not heard other people say this, like, but it's sort of my little coined thing that I came up with when thinking about this, is that it may be well acknowledged that new players are the lifeblood of the continuation of a game over time as an entity commercially. But veterans, in many respects, in my opinion, are the ones that carry the legacy of a game. They carry the background, and they're the ones that sort of hold the passion for the game. And even among the new players, like in the sense that they're the ones that have been supporting it, have like a lot of excitement for it, are still there, still love it. And they're very valuable. Like, even if, and I think it's very intangible, and I can almost go on a different subject with this. I hate to go off on a tangent here. But even though we often, when discussing supporting companies of tabletop games, even though we credit from a business perspective the new players as necessary for the continuation of the game, what I think is often overlooked is the intangible aspect of veterans and like the real fans, like core fans of that game, because they're still spending money, like, you know. And but the other thing is they're doing a lot to drum up interest, and they're often the ones that are going to do better at like hosting games and demos for newer players and being there to really support them in that regard. So, who owns the game, and who has the right to say whether a new edition should or shouldn't come out? It's interesting. I think I'm going to go through some examples here. I know the money's going to come into it, but I'm going to do my best not to make that the focus. So right off the bat, I just finished talking about Saga, but Saga, that was all first edition focused. Saga second edition has come out. Like many situations where a new edition comes out, many people were upset for this, you know, with a lot of different reasons. Most probably aren't. I mean, when I'm looking across Facebook and just paying attention to things, I would say there was a majority that probably supported Studio Tomahawk in its decision to do this and were excited for it. But there was still a significant portion that were vocal and, you know, confident and comfortable enough to just kind of say, like, this is what I think about it, these are the specifics, and this is why I'm not doing it, and things. Now, many people will use the argument that there's nothing wrong with the game, so why fix it? It doesn't need to be fixed. Many people will kind of take the approach that there's no reason to spend any more, and we kind of talked about that as an issue. Some folks have, will have particular issues with the rules and something being changed. And really, that is going to be a matter of personal preference. I mean, if you say that, you go through step A through step B to get to point C in one set of rules, but in the other one, you really have to kind of go through step A and minus step B to multiply to step D with C. Sounds more complicated. It doesn't sound like an improvement, but it's just going to be what you prefer in the end. And so that's definitely, it's a reason. If somebody doesn't like the game and the way the game actually changes, I think it's a valid reason to maybe not go into the new edition. If you have a core group of friends that play and you kind of look around the table and there's 6 of you and you're the only ones in your town that are playing this and you all have the original stuff and you just look at each other and say, well, why should we together spend $600 to go to the second edition? More power to you. I mean, I don't really think that there's an argument against that. But in the case of Saga, because of the way the transition happened with the rules over time, and they were all based on the core book, they were all based on a core principle in the rules, but then that evolved over time and got tweaked slightly with each new release to the point where you kind of needed everything, every single book, if you wanted to play in tournament play, and if you wanted every single aspect of the rules. You couldn't just go back to the core rule book. And it was really difficult for them to make sweeping changes to the fundamental mechanics of the rules. And so I think that Studio Tomahawk kind of utilized the situation to start with a fresh slate with Saga 2.0. And to their credit, I don't own Aegis and Arthur, but for the folks that just got into the Arthurian stuff, they did it in such a way that you're still able to use your Aegis and Arthur book. And so they even kind of went back a little bit and grandfathered a little bit in, just not back to, let's say, Crescent and Cross. And so it's interesting because what I do see in the Saga community quite a bit is that if people really love a game, there is a loyalty that is developed for the game designers or the game itself, for the company of the game itself. And it's an interesting topic. Another one that we could probably talk about all day long. And it's just that, do companies and designers deserve your loyalty? I think it's really a matter of opinion. You could almost look at it for anything. I mean, if you have a favorite musician or musical group, then over time, you develop a bit of a loyalty to that artist and the enjoyment that you've gotten from them over time and just inspiration and things. And, there are going to be albums that you like more or less than others as albums come out in the future. And I know this isn't a direct comparison because I know, buying another album of music doesn't invalidate your ability to listen to a CD or a vinyl record of an old album. But people do look at changes in musical style as artists evolve and critically. And there are some people more than, that are willing to accept changes that musicians make over time more than others. There are some that will say, I love this musician, I respect their wanting to go in this direction, I did buy it because I was interested, and I do, still listen to the new stuff, but I prefer the old stuff. And you can tell, there's this, respect, and there's this, loyalty that's built and wrapped as part of their admiration and support for what they like. But then, there are some people that could, from their worldview and position, after many years of listening to an artist, feel almost betrayed when that artist makes a major change to their style of songwriting or music. And, they could do anything. I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to like burn all their stuff and throw it all out, but you never know. I mean, like, but they could just kind of take the same line of just disappointment and even, you know, in some cases can be accusatory indirectly to that artist in their dealings in situations, whether it be online or whatever. And so I find it funny because I found with Saga, most folks seem to be in that first category where they love, in many cases, the historical periods and painting the miniatures and the offerings that were part of their history with Saga in the game. And they were just ready to, you know, give it a fair shot. I even encountered something that I wasn't crazy about, that even not having seen the rules yet, there was something that I'd heard about in the second release that I still have to confirm whether it's true, but I was a little disappointed to hear it, but I was still in the camp where I'm pre-ordering it. I am going to give this a try, give it a fair shot, and I'll just see whether I'm disappointed with that part of it or not, you know, when I'm done. Or when it comes and it arrives. And so it's interesting. I mean, so that's the way I felt today with Saga, but if I go back along the Games Workshop sort of trail and my experience with Warhammer 40k, after getting back into 40k and kind of coming in end of 5th edition as 6th edition was starting, I was fine with that change, like, you know, doing the 6th edition. It was more like 6th edition. It was when I was kind of getting back into it again. But I kind of very quickly got disappointed with, you know, the revamping of the editions after that. And I think part of it was the money piece I'm not supposed to talk about, you know, like the price for the codex and for your army, or codexes if you play multiple armies, and then the rulebook. At the end of the day, if I only played Warhammer 40k, I really don't think, if I at least was like kind of just played a couple of armies, not like a ton of armies, and just really limited it, because I know people that do that. I mean, in talking, either chatting through comments or even through videos with Idic Beer, you know, with Warhammer, he's done that in the past with 40k, where you just kind of put an army on a shelf for a certain edition, so you don't have to invest in everything in that army if you have lots of armies. There are ways to mitigate that, but it's still what didn't sit with me. One of the things that really didn't sit with me was that the books, particularly 7th edition, were so beautiful. The bindings, and like, they were pretty pricey, but the output was such a beautiful product that I just couldn't see having, I'm going to grab it while we're talking, it invalidated after 3 years. I don't know where this fits in the timeline of publications for Games Workshop and how good this one is versus others, but this is one of the best that I'd ever seen. You know, and this was basically your 7th edition release. 3 really nice books. You got the rules, you know, and then you had Dark Millennium and Galaxy of War, so like fluff and you know, various other things in addition to the rules, and it was really beautiful. And I kind of held off even on this one, initially purchasing it, and I eventually committed. But the idea that within a 3-year time span, and I don't think 3 years is unfair to say that that's kind of not very far off from the timeline that Games Workshop works on. But I just felt like these beautiful, costly publications, not really stuff you're doing online, not kind of thinner, smaller things, but this stuff's getting like invalidated so quick, and it's like I can't see having like this like entire shelf of beautiful books that are can't be used, you know, anymore if you're keeping up with editions for that purpose. And so that was something that kind of bothered me a bit, and I just found that it really just does depend on the cycle and how fast they're going. Because I really don't have a problem with supporting a company if I really like a game. And I do think part of it is that. I do think that there needs to be an understanding that if you want something to continue and to flourish, you can always play it in your basement. And that concept of just they never can take away the game that you have really is so true. And despite that, we logically, as soon as we see something better, or like we call it better, but or think of it that way, but like newer, like there's something new coming out in the thing you do, it's always viewed as, oh, well, like what I have is no longer the best, or it's no longer the latest, or whatever it is. And so even if you know ingrained in you that you can actually just play the thing you've always had, there is that sense of like, oh, like, look what they went and did, you know. It's really easy to adopt that mentality, because now we're just sitting there with not like the latest thing, you know. I mean, it's kind of like there's some similarity to going out and buying like a phone, like a smartphone, and then that feeling when all of a sudden there's like the next version that comes out. Like there was a time when you were the one that had that like awesome version, you know, whatever it is, the latest one, and like you had that in your pocket. That's what you had. You were on the cusp. And if you're like many of us, like you're not buying every version that's coming out. Like you're not buying it every year, like a new phone. So then you transition when that new phone comes out to the one that no longer has the new thing and is accepting of the old and has, you know, the outdated. And so I think to some degree there's a psychological aversion to the new edition, even if you're content to play with the old, for that reason. So then there's like Bolt Action, like another historical game. Now, I kind of fell out of playing Bolt Action. It's not that I don't like the game. I'm not as much into World War II as I am other historical periods. I do go through times when I really do like to play it, and I know a lot of people came to my channel initially with my Bolt Action battle reports, and I do like it, but it's just not like my choice. Like I do prefer Horse and Musket. It is, and I do actually prefer Dark Ages, and so I never did update to the second edition. You know, for whatever reason, I just didn't. But it seemed like they made a good decision too, in the sense that even though I didn't buy into it, it's not because I felt like they shouldn't have and they shouldn't have did this. And it seemed like enough time had spanned that they could update the rules with things that they wanted to do. There were a lot of things that were already being done differently than the rulebook in tournaments for Bolt Action. And so, and then really, except for like the initial aversion to that, I never hear anybody talk about really the problem of going from first edition to second edition of Bolt Action anymore. I do admit, the Bolt Action Osprey book is a beautiful book for first edition. I love that hardcover book. And, you know, like, these are the way rulebooks should be designed. I mean, like, they are beautiful. Perhaps not as, like, epic as this, but a beautiful book in its own right, and worth it. Then, my last example, I think I'd like to use, because it's unique for me, in the sense that it's a situation where I'm actually hoping another edition comes out. I've talked tons about how I want Musket and Tomahawks to come out with another edition. I'm not going to bore everybody with that discussion because I've said it so many times. But this is a different sort of discussion, and this is Infinity. I don't talk about Infinity that much. It's funny because my Infinity models, I have to look at the screen and position my hand to go, or right there, ones that I haven't painted. You can probably recognize that blue box. That's a tag. But I have some other models up there. And I have some Infinity models. This is really weird, but right there on my shelf, or right there. But But have another sip of Scotch, Palmer. So, Infinity is one of the situations where I really loved the game. Infinity is a great game. I have a lot of respect for Corvus Belli and the way they design rules and in their miniatures. I'm not huge into the anime style stuff, like that sort of style. It's not my number one. I have an appreciation for it, and I do like the models. But I really liked what they did with the game. It was the kind of game, and I've said this, but it was the kind of game that I couldn't play it once every 5 months. And there were not enough people that I knew that were playing it regularly. And although there are groups that pop up in my city that do play it, it just was never convenient for me. There were people I didn't know at the time, or, I had a bad experience where there was a time when I didn't know anybody that was playing it, and I would set up games with folks, and I had people that didn't show up and things, and I just, for a lot of reasons, things stood in my way to play the game, but it wasn't because I disliked the game, and so I kind of fell out of playing it, and in the end, I did have a couple of games with one of my regular gaming friends, and we enjoyed them. But other things came along over time, and we just didn't play. And if we weren't going to play, then I couldn't play in my mind, because the rules, they're not conducive to just playing once every 5 months. I find the rules are sophisticated enough and unique enough in some ways, and I love them for that I just couldn't. And so I had the free printed off rules from the first edition, and then Infinity, I don't know if it was N2 or N3. I thought N2 happened somewhere in between, that they're on N3 now, but I never updated to the most recent one, which I think is N3. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the latest one. I never got it. It looks like a beautiful book. Not unlike this, actually, just all black, I think, but I think it has several books in it. It looks beautiful. I really like what they've done with it, and I thought about my models for it and everything, and my friend and I were talking about it, and we just said this edition's been out how long now? It's been years. The one that is the current one, and we just said if we're gonna do it, we'll do it in the next edition. And it's a bit of a cop-out. But at the same time, because for all the reasons that I started this discussion off saying that there's a timeline and you can experience a game at certain points, and why would you skip the current one, why not experience that before the next one? But we just have other things going on, and we're content to just hold on to our stuff and play the next edition, assuming that there will be one. I think that is an assumption, but assuming that there'll be one, we'll just play the next one. And so I don't really think game manufacturers keep that in mind, that they're putting the next edition out for those folks that are holding off until the next edition. But it is sort of, in some ways, a nice, you're starting off again on the ground floor with some new rules. You're not having to get some other ones and then change real quick and do the other. And then, it's a little timeline piece there. It's like a product timeline piece where you're just saying at that next bump, I'm gonna consider that again, but until then I'm content. And we really both like the game. I mean, it's a really great game, and it, with me not really playing 40k anymore at the moment, it would be a nice sci-fi game to play, to have in the repertoire. But yeah, we're just holding on to our stuff and just thinking, yeah, we're gonna look out for when the next edition comes out, and then maybe consider doing it then. So what do you guys think? Does it matter the circumstances around an edition change, releasing another edition? Do you think that companies do a disservice to their fan base, be it veteran or not, when they put out new editions? What are the reasons that make you hop on and do a new edition versus just keeping the stuff that you've always had and just saying you're fine to just keep your toys that you have now and just play with those? So, yeah, interested to what you guys have to say. So, I'm sorry if I rambled quite a bit tonight. I can see on my clock here that I've gone about 58 minutes. That's a good chunk normal Heresy Hump Day. But yeah, I think that's it. Again, if you guys are interested in seeing the Musty Wargamers on Thursday, it's 8 Central, 7 Mountain, 9 Eastern, wherever you want to chime in. And Adam over at Tabletop Minions will be dropping by as well. Okay, talk to you guys later. Take care.